The airport was quiet that morning, with only the sound of rolling suitcases and the distant hum of announcements filling the air. A private jet waited on the runway, its sleek silver body shining under the soft sunlight. It belonged to a woman whose name most people did not know, even though her businesses touched lives across many countries. She was a billionaire, but she preferred to travel with little noise, without letting the world know who she was. She believed in simplicity and in letting her work speak louder than her wealth. That morning, she walked toward her plane with calm steps, dressed in a neat black dress and a pair of comfortable shoes. She carried only a small handbag. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, and she wore no heavy jewelry. Nothing about her appearance shouted power or riches. To most eyes, she looked like any other passenger about to board a plane. She liked it that way. It allowed her to move without being noticed, to see how people truly behaved when they did not know who stood before them. As she reached the steps of the jet, a group of flight attendants waited at the door. They were dressed in crisp uniforms, smiling politely, though one of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes, looked her up and down with a brief glance of disinterest. The others offered polite greetings, but she noticed the slight shift in tone, the almost invisible hesitation that came when people assumed something about her without asking. She had grown used to it, though it never stopped surprising her how quickly people judged. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice warm and polite. The attendants nodded, their smiles practiced. The tall one simply stepped aside, allowing her to enter without much warmth. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of leather and fresh flowers. The seats were wide and luxurious, designed for comfort during long journeys. She chose a seat near the window, setting her small handbag beside her. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the same attendant whispering something to her colleague, both of them glancing briefly in her direction before looking away. She understood what they might be thinking. Perhaps they believed she was an assistant to some wealthy man, or maybe a guest invited by the plane's real owner. She did not correct them. She rarely did. She preferred to let people reveal themselves first. As passengers prepared and crew moved about, she watched quietly. Her calmness often made people underestimate her, but she carried within her the strength of a life filled with struggles and victories. She remembered the days when she could not even afford a bus ticket, the days when she worked late into the night just to keep food on the table. Those memories never left her, and they shaped the way she walked into every room. She never forgot where she came from, and that was why she never needed to announce who she was. The engines of the jet hummed softly as preparations continued. The captain walked through briefly to greet the crew, giving her a polite nod without addressing her directly. She returned the nod with a smile, patient as always. The tall flight attendant approached her seat with a tray in her hands. "Would you like some water?" she asked, her tone polite but clipped, lacking warmth. "Yes, thank you," the woman replied gently. The glass was set before her with a quick motion, almost careless, as though the attendant had many more important things to do. The woman picked it up and took a sip, her eyes steady, her movements calm. She did not respond to the small coldness in the gesture. She had learned long ago that dignity was not in reacting to every slight, but in choosing when and how to respond. She glanced outside the window at the clear blue sky, her thoughts drifting. This journey was an important one. Meetings awaited her at the other end of the flight, decisions that could affect hundreds of workers, entire communities, and new projects she had been carefully building. She carried responsibility that went far beyond herself, but at this moment, she appeared only as a quiet passenger. A few minutes later, she heard laughter from the front of the cabin. The same attendant was chatting with another passenger, her tone light and cheerful, filled with charm. The difference in behavior was sharp, and though it might have bothered someone else, the woman simply observed. It was not new to her. She had seen it in hotels, restaurants, boardrooms, places where people quickly measured others based on appearances, deciding who deserved respect and who did not. Still, she hoped, silently, that perhaps things would change. Perhaps people would learn not to judge so quickly. The seat belt sign lit up, and the plane prepared for takeoff. The attendants moved efficiently, checking belts and securing trays. The tall one came to her row, leaning in slightly. "Seat belt, please," she said shortly. The woman smiled politely and fastened it without complaint. "All set," she said kindly. The attendant gave a quick nod and moved on without another word. As the jet lifted into the sky, the woman closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar sensation of rising above the earth. She loved flying. It reminded her of freedom, of possibility, of how far she had come. She remembered the first time she had ever stepped on a plane, a young girl filled with dreams too big for her pocket but not too big for her heart. She carried those dreams until they became reality, though many had doubted her along the way. Now, seated in her own aircraft, she felt a quiet pride. Yet she also carried a weight, knowing how many still walked the difficult roads she once walked. It was part of why she stayed humble, why she never dressed in a way that shouted wealth. She wanted to remain close to reality, to never lose touch with the truth of life. The attendant passed by again, glancing at her with the same dismissive expression. The woman did not mind. She knew that in time, people revealed who they truly were, and often the lessons came not with words but with experiences that changed them forever. For now, she simply leaned back, sipped her water, and let the sky open wide before her. She did not yet know that this flight, meant to be a simple journey, would become a powerful story. She did not yet know that within hours, the same attendant who looked down on her would learn a lesson she would never forget. The woman only knew one thing: no matter what happened, she would remain herself, calm, graceful, and strong. For that was the true mark of power, and no misunderstanding or unkindness could ever take it away from her. The plane had now reached the steady height of the clouds. The engines hummed softly, and the passengers settled into their seats. The quiet billionaire sat near the window, her gaze moving between the endless blue sky and the busy attendants walking down the aisle. She had traveled countless times before, but something about this flight already felt different. She had noticed from the very start how one particular flight attendant treated her differently. The others were polite, though distant, but this one carried herself with a sharpness that could not be missed. Every word she spoke to the woman was short, clipped, almost as if she was doing her a favor by even speaking at all. The billionaire did not let it disturb her peace, but she noticed every detail carefully. She was a woman who built empires by studying people, and she knew the language of tone, the power of body language, and the truth hidden behind the smallest actions. After an hour in the air, the woman felt her throat dry. She pressed the small button on her seat to call for assistance. The tall flight attendant appeared, her arms folded lightly across her chest, her eyes carrying an impatient gleam. "Yes?" she asked, as though the simple call was an interruption. The woman smiled softly. "Could I have some water, please?" she asked in her calm voice. The attendant gave a small sigh that was almost hidden but not quite. She turned without a word and walked back. A few minutes later, she returned with a glass of water, setting it down with a quick motion, the edge of the glass tapping against the table harder than needed. "Here," she said, her voice flat. The billionaire gave a polite nod. "Thank you," she replied, still holding on to her gentle tone. The attendant did not answer. She simply turned and walked away, already smiling when she reached another passenger's row. There, her voice changed into sweetness, her face bright with charm, as though she had suddenly become another person. The woman took a sip of the water and breathed deeply. She did not let her heart fill with anger. She had faced far worse than this in her life. But deep inside, she could not help but wonder why people still believed appearances told the full story. Why respect was given to some and denied to others based on nothing more than an assumption. The flight went on, and the woman remained calm, but the behavior did not stop. Whenever she asked for anything small, whether it was a napkin or a refill, the same attitude returned: short replies, cold stares, a sense that her requests were a burden. The other attendants, perhaps following the tall one's lead, slowly began to treat her the same way. None of them knew who she truly was. They thought she was just another passenger, maybe even a guest who barely belonged in the luxurious cabin. At one point, she tried to adjust her seat, but the mechanism seemed stuck. She waved gently for assistance. The tall attendant came again, her footsteps sharp against the floor. "What is it now?" she asked, her tone openly irritated. The woman kept her voice soft. "My seat doesn't seem to be moving back. Could you help me, please?" The attendant leaned down, fiddled with the button, and with a push, the seat moved back easily. She gave a quick smirk. "It works fine," she said, as though accusing the woman of not knowing how to use it. "Thank you for helping," the woman replied, still composed. But something shifted in the attendant's eyes. She was growing restless, perhaps expecting the woman to react, to defend herself, to argue. Yet no anger came. That calmness somehow bothered her even more. As the hours passed, the tension quietly grew. The billionaire sat still, her mind on her upcoming meetings, but she could not ignore the heaviness of being treated as though she was invisible, or worse, unworthy. She knew she could end it all in a second by revealing her identity. One sentence could change everything. One truth could turn their coldness into sudden warmth. But she chose silence. She wanted to see how far this would go, how far the world still needed to travel in order to learn the simplest lesson: that respect should never depend on appearance. Toward the middle of the flight, a small meal was served. Trays were set down in front of passengers, and the attendants moved quickly to ensure everyone had what they needed. When it came to her turn, the tall attendant placed the tray down with little care. The plate shifted dangerously close to the edge of the table, almost spilling. The woman gently moved it to the center, smiled, and said, "Thank you very much." The attendant gave no reply. She simply walked away. The billionaire looked down at her meal. She ate quietly, her manners graceful as always, but she felt the eyes of the other passengers on her. Some had noticed the treatment. Some exchanged glances, whispers moving like small waves. But none spoke up. Silence often followed injustice, and that was what pained her more than the treatment itself. When the trays were cleared, she decided to rest her eyes. She leaned back, but just as she closed them, she heard the sharp sound of heels approaching again. The tall attendant stopped beside her. "You should keep your things tucked in properly," the attendant said sharply, pointing at the woman's small handbag that sat neatly beside her seat. "This is a plane, not your living room." The words were unnecessary, almost insulting, for the bag was already in place and not disturbing anyone. The woman opened her eyes and looked at her with calm patience. "I'll make sure it's in place," she said softly, moving the bag an inch closer to the side. The attendant gave a short nod, her lips pressed into a thin line, and walked away again. The billionaire's heart was steady, but deep inside, she felt the sting of the moment. Not because the words hurt, but because they reflected a truth she had faced too many times before. No matter how successful she became, there would always be those who saw only what they wanted to see. To them, she was not a powerful leader, not a visionary businesswoman, not the owner of the very jet they worked on. To them, she was just another woman whose worth could be measured by surface judgments. She let the feeling pass, breathing deeply, reminding herself of her strength. She had not built her life by reacting to every obstacle. She had built it by staying steady, by walking with grace even when others tried to push her down. But the flight was not over yet, and the lesson was far from complete. The quiet tension was moving towards something more, something that would leave every person on that plane remembering this journey forever. The woman did not yet know it, but soon the very patience she carried would be tested in the harshest way, and the truth she kept hidden would shine brighter than ever. The flight continued steadily across the wide skies, but inside the cabin the air felt heavier with each passing hour. The billionaire woman, still seated quietly by the window, carried herself with grace. She had not raised her voice, not argued, not demanded to be treated differently. Yet, the way she was being treated by the tall flight attendant remained sharp and unkind. Every small request seemed to bother the attendant, every word spoken to her came with a tone that lacked warmth. The woman noticed it clearly. It was not the kind of treatment anyone expected in such a luxurious flight, especially from staff whose duty was to ensure comfort. Yet, here she was, facing an invisible wall of disrespect. She sat still, her thoughts returning to her past. She remembered when she was young and worked in an office where nobody respected her ideas. People had dismissed her not because her thoughts lacked strength, but because she looked too simple, too young, too different from what they expected in a leader. She had grown used to walking into rooms where people doubted her, only to prove them wrong through results. That memory gave her strength even now, reminding her that respect earned through patience lasted longer than respect demanded in anger. After some time, she pressed the call button again, this time to request a blanket. The cabin had grown a little cold, and she wanted to stay warm for the long journey. The tall attendant appeared, her eyes already showing irritation. "Yes, what is it now?" she asked, her voice low but edged with impatience. The woman spoke gently. "Could I please have a blanket?" The attendant tilted her head slightly, as though the request itself was unreasonable. She turned sharply and walked away without answering. Minutes passed before she returned, dropping the folded blanket on the table in front of the woman with a motion that almost made it slide to the floor. The billionaire caught it before it slipped, looked up at her, and said, "Thank you very much." The attendant gave no reply. She simply walked off quickly, her heels striking against the floor. Other passengers noticed. Some raised their eyebrows, exchanging silent glances. They could not understand why this particular woman was being treated so differently. Yet nobody said a word. Silence filled the space where truth should have stood. The woman unfolded the blanket slowly and wrapped it around herself. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, letting the warmth cover her body. She had dealt with worse storms in her life. This was just another test of patience. Still, deep inside, she wondered how long people would continue to judge without knowing the truth. The plane sailed smoothly, but the tension only grew. At one point, a small child across the aisle dropped his toy, and it rolled near the billionaire's feet. She bent down, picked it up, and handed it back with a smile. The child giggled happily, thanking her with innocent joy. For a moment, the coldness around her melted, replaced by that pure sound of laughter. She smiled too, grateful for that little reminder of kindness. But soon, the tall attendant returned, this time looking even more restless. She seemed to take issue with everything the woman did, no matter how small. "You should not lean against the window like that," she said suddenly. "It may disturb the structure of the seat." The billionaire turned her head slightly, surprised by the unnecessary remark. She was sitting calmly, just like anyone else. Her voice remained steady as she replied, "I'll be careful." The attendant narrowed her eyes but said nothing more. She walked away again, leaving behind an air of discomfort. The woman took another deep breath. She had lived long enough to know that sometimes people carried battles inside themselves, battles that spilled out onto others unfairly. Perhaps this attendant carried her own frustrations, her own disappointments. Still, it did not excuse unkindness. Hours passed, and the passengers grew quieter, some resting, others reading. The billionaire opened a small notebook from her bag and began writing. She always carried it with her, filling its pages with ideas, reminders, and reflections. Her handwriting moved slowly, calm and steady. She wrote about the meeting ahead, about the workers she hoped to support, about new projects that could bring jobs and opportunities. She was thinking not of herself, but of the lives her decisions could touch. The tall attendant passed by, noticing the notebook. She smirked slightly and said, "Taking notes for your boss." The words were meant as a joke, but they carried a sharpness, an assumption that cut deeper than laughter. The billionaire looked up, her eyes calm. She closed the notebook gently, her fingers resting on the cover. "No," she said softly. "These are just my own thoughts." The attendant gave a short laugh, not of humor but of disbelief, and walked away again. The billionaire remained still. She had been underestimated before, but each time, she had risen above it, proving not with words but with actions who she truly was. She decided again not to reveal her identity. She wanted to see this through, to let the truth reveal itself when the right time came. The hours stretched on, and though she remained quiet, she noticed the whispers spreading among the other passengers. Some were clearly uncomfortable with the way she was being treated. Some wanted to speak up but held back, afraid of drawing attention. The silence of the crowd often gave strength to the loudness of one unkind voice. The woman closed her eyes again, resting. But deep within her, she knew something was building. The tall attendant's behavior was not calming down, it was growing sharper with each small encounter. The storm had not yet broken. And she was right. The moment was approaching when patience alone would no longer shield her. The quiet disrespect that had filled the hours would soon burst into something bigger, something that no one on that plane would be able to ignore. The billionaire had chosen silence for now, but life had a way of uncovering truths at the right time. The hidden power she carried would not remain hidden forever. Soon, every person on that flight, crew and passengers alike, would witness a revelation that would shake them deeply. For now, she leaned back, steady as always, holding her dignity close. She knew the test was not yet over. The real turning point had not yet arrived. But when it did, her grace would shine brighter than the clouds surrounding the plane. The hours in the sky moved slowly, but inside the cabin the weight of unspoken tension kept growing. The billionaire woman sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze sometimes on the clouds, sometimes on her notebook, and sometimes on the faces of the crew. She had endured the coldness, the careless service, and the dismissive tones. Through it all, she had kept her calm, choosing silence instead of anger, patience instead of protest. But life has a way of pushing situations to a breaking point. That breaking point was now closer than ever. The tall attendant moved back and forth, her face sharp, her voice sweeter for some passengers and harder for others. Every time she passed the woman's seat, there was a small remark, a sigh, or a dismissive glance. Each time, the woman chose grace over reaction. But this endless calmness seemed to only irritate the attendant more. The plane had entered some light turbulence. The seat belt signs came on, and the crew asked everyone to remain seated. Trays rattled softly, glasses shook, but it was nothing unusual. The billionaire pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders and held her notebook close to her side. Moments later, the turbulence eased. The seat belt signs dimmed, and the crew returned to moving about. The woman pressed her call button, not for a demand but for something small, a cup of tea to warm her hands and ease her mind. The tall attendant came again, her steps firm. Her eyes carried a look that showed she had already decided this request would annoy her. "Yes, what do you need now?" she asked. The woman smiled gently. "Could I have a cup of tea, please?" The attendant narrowed her eyes slightly. "Tea? We just served refreshments. Why didn't you ask then?" The woman's smile did not fade. "I didn't want to disturb anyone earlier. But if it is possible, I would truly appreciate a cup." The attendant gave a short laugh that held no kindness. "Well, it's going to take time. You should be more thoughtful next time." She turned and walked away. Passengers near them exchanged uneasy looks. They had seen the difference in tone, the way the woman was being treated compared to others. Whispers filled the quiet cabin again, but still no one spoke up. Minutes later, the attendant returned with the tea. She set it down quickly, too quickly, and the hot liquid spilled over the edge of the cup, a few drops landing on the woman's hand. She winced slightly but did not raise her voice. She only dabbed at it with the napkin. "Be careful," she said softly, almost to herself. The attendant rolled her eyes. "It's not that hot," she replied curtly before walking away. For the first time, the woman felt a deep heaviness in her chest. It was not pain from the hot tea but the realization of how easily kindness could be denied to someone simply because of who they appeared to be. She stayed calm, but her silence was not weakness. It was strength held tightly in her heart. But the attendant had not finished. A little later, as the cabin grew quiet again, she came back to the woman's seat. She looked down at her with a face full of irritation. "You should stop pressing the call button for every little thing," she said, her voice sharper now. "You are not the only one here." The billionaire looked up at her, her eyes calm, steady, unshaken. "I only ask for simple things," she said softly. "I don't wish to trouble anyone." But the words only fueled the attendant's restlessness. She had perhaps expected anger, perhaps a loud argument. The calm reply, respectful as it was, only seemed to unsettle her more. And then, without warning, it happened. The attendant leaned closer, her face tight with frustration, and in a moment of lost control, she lifted her hand and struck the woman lightly across the cheek. The cabin froze. Time seemed to stop. The sound was not loud, but it carried through the silence, louder than thunder in the still air. Gasps filled the room. Passengers turned in shock. Some covered their mouths, unable to believe what they had just seen. Other attendants stood frozen, their eyes wide. The billionaire did not raise her hand to her face. She did not cry out. She simply sat still, her eyes locked on the attendants, her face calm but firm. A deep silence filled the cabin. The passengers waited, expecting her to explode in anger, to shout, to demand justice. But she did not. She breathed slowly, her dignity wrapping around her like armor. The attendant stepped back, her own face pale now, realizing too late what she had done. Her lips trembled, her eyes darted around, searching for support that would not come. The other crew members looked at her in horror, unable to believe that she had crossed such a line. The billionaire finally spoke, her voice soft but steady, carrying more weight than a shout ever could. "Respect is a choice," she said simply. Her words were quiet, but every ear in the cabin heard them clearly. They rang through the silence like a bell, echoing in the hearts of everyone present. The attendant stood frozen, her hands still trembling, her face burning with shame. She could not find an answer. The other passengers stared, their eyes now filled not with judgment toward the woman but with disbelief toward the one who had wronged her. The billionaire turned her gaze away, looking once again out the window at the clouds. She did not argue, she did not complain. She only carried herself with the same calm dignity she had held from the beginning. The flight continued in silence. The tall attendant disappeared to the back of the cabin, her pride crushed, her steps shaking. The other crew members tried to carry on with their duties, but their hands trembled, their voices shook. The passengers whispered in low voices, unable to shake off the weight of what they had seen. And through it all, the woman sat quietly, her eyes on the horizon. She knew the truth was about to surface. She had not revealed who she was. She had not reminded them of her power. But soon, the world inside that plane would learn the reality. The story would not end with silence. The truth would come, and it would arrive with the force of justice. For now, she remained as she always was, calm, graceful, unbroken. But everyone around her knew the moment of revelation was near. The plane slowly descended toward the city where it was meant to land. Inside the cabin, silence still hung heavy like a weight no one could shake off. What had happened a short while ago replayed in everyone's mind. The passengers still looked at the quiet woman near the window, unable to believe her calmness. She had been disrespected, insulted, and even struck, yet she had not raised her voice once. The tall attendant remained hidden in the back of the cabin, unable to face anyone. Her once sharp and confident steps had been replaced by trembling movements. The other attendants worked nervously, their voices softer than before, as though afraid to disturb the air. They kept glancing at the woman, shame and guilt written across their faces. The billionaire sat still, her eyes on the clouds as the jet dropped lower. She held her dignity the same way she had always done, quietly, with grace. She did not need to prove anything, not with words or anger. She knew the truth was stronger than silence, and soon that truth would arrive. When the wheels touched the runway, the cabin shook gently. Passengers straightened in their seats, fastening belts as the plane rolled smoothly across the ground. The engine slowed, and the pilot's calm voice came over the speakers, announcing their arrival. The woman closed her notebook and placed it carefully in her handbag. She smoothed her dress, her movements quiet but steady. She knew the moment had come. As the plane came to a stop, the door opened, and the captain himself entered the cabin to greet the special passenger he knew was on board. His eyes searched, and when they fell upon the woman near the window, his face softened with deep respect. He walked straight toward her, his steps firm, his voice warm. "Madam," he said, bowing his head slightly. "It's always an honor to have you on board. I hope the flight was comfortable." Every passenger turned at once. Every attendant froze in place. Their eyes widened in shock, their hearts almost stopping. The woman they had dismissed, the woman they had treated with coldness, the woman who had been insulted and struck was the one the captain himself was bowing to. The billionaire gave a soft smile, her voice calm as ever. "Thank you, Captain. The flight was fine." The captain nodded, his eyes shining with respect. "Your aircraft is ready for inspection whenever you wish, madam. And the arrangements for your next journey are already in place." The words fell like thunder in the silent cabin. Gasps spread among the passengers. Some covered their mouths, others sat back in their seats, overwhelmed by disbelief. The attendants looked at one another with pale faces, the truth sinking in. The tall attendant, trembling, stepped slowly forward, her head lowered, her face red with shame. Her lips parted, but no words came. She tried to speak, but her voice shook too much. The billionaire turned her gaze toward her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her silence was heavier than any lecture. Then, in her calm voice, she spoke. "Do you see now how dangerous assumptions can be?" she asked softly, but her words reached every corner of the cabin. "Respect is not something you give only to those who look powerful. Respect must be given to every human being, because you never know who they truly are." Her words cut through the air, not with anger but with truth. The passengers nodded silently, some lowering their eyes, some watching her with admiration. The other attendants shifted uncomfortably, guilt pressing on their shoulders. The tall attendant's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, I am sorry." The woman looked at her, her face calm but firm. "Sorry is the beginning," she replied. "But remember this lesson for the rest of your life. You cannot take back what was done, but you can choose never to repeat it again with me or with anyone else." The attendant bowed her head, her voice breaking. "Yes. I understand." The billionaire rose from her seat slowly, her presence commanding the space without effort. She picked up her small handbag and walked toward the door, the captain and crew stepping aside to give her way. Passengers followed her with their eyes, some whispering in awe, some nodding in respect. Before stepping out, She turned once more to the cabin, her voice steady. Power is not about wealth. True power is about grace. Remember that. With those words, she walked out of the plane, leaving behind a silence so deep it seemed the entire cabin was holding its breath. The passengers sat still, their hearts heavy with the lesson they had just witnessed. Some murmured quietly, saying they would never forget this flight. The attendants stood frozen, their uniforms neat but their pride broken. The tall attendant sank into a seat at the back, her face hidden in her hands. She had learned a lesson that would follow her for the rest of her life. Outside, the woman stepped onto the ground where her team waited for her. Cars were lined up, assistants ready with files, and staff eager to receive her. Yet she carried herself with the same simplicity she had shown inside the plane. No one would guess from her quiet steps that she owned empires. She moved with humility, with strength hidden in grace. As she entered her car, she thought back to the faces she had left behind. She did not hate them, nor did she feel the need for revenge. She only hoped that her calmness had taught them something far greater than punishment ever could. She believed that true change came not from anger but from reflection. If even one person from that cabin chose to live differently after this, then the lesson had been worth it. The cars drove away, and the plane remained on the runway. Inside, the passengers slowly began to speak, their voices filled with awe. Some said they had never seen such dignity in their lives. Others admitted they felt ashamed for not standing up earlier. The crew, humbled and shaken, knew they had been given a chance to change. And the tall attendant, sitting in silence, repeated the words again and again in her mind, "Respect is not for appearances, it is for everyone." She knew she would never forget them. The story of that flight did not stay inside the cabin. Slowly, as passengers shared what they had witnessed, it spread beyond the runway. People spoke of the calm woman who turned out to be the billionaire owner, of the slap that was answered not with anger but with dignity, of the lesson that respect should never depend on appearance. It became more than a story, it became a reminder of how small actions can carry great meaning. And the woman herself? She continued her journey, meeting her teams, building new projects, supporting new communities. She did not waste time telling the world about what had happened. She simply carried on, as she always had, gracefully, powerfully, silently. For she knew the truth: wealth could buy airplanes, but it could not buy respect. Only character could do that. And she had chosen to live with a character so strong that even insult could not break it. That was her real wealth. That was her real power.